we'll move on to our first presentation with Abby Martin and Mike Prysner. Abby's the host, writer, and producer of the show Empire Files, which airs on Telesur. She previously worked at RT, where she hosted Breaking the Set, and a lot of those videos are still relevant today. She also founded the citizen journalism group Media Roots and has a podcast by the same name. Mike is the co-producer of Empire Files as well. He's also an anti-war activist that co-founded March Forward, which is an organization of active duty U.S. military members of the Iraq and Afghanistan war that encourages active military members to resist deployment. He's also an organizer with the PSL and Answer. Please help me welcome Abby Martin and Mike Prysner.
Thank you, team. Thanks to all the organizations that made this event happen. We're really happy to be back here at really what is one of the many centers of the struggle for Palestinian rights across the country and around the world. Before we get into our presentation, I just wanted to draw attention to that, the moment that we're in. It's amazing to see so many younger activists here who are new to the issue of Palestine, new to activism around Palestine, building this campus movement that really spreads across every university around the world. And I want to say that it took a long time to get to this moment. In fact, just 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was very difficult to talk about Palestine on a college campus, anywhere, even in the left, even in the progressive movement. Looking back to 2002, when the invasion of the Iraq War was beginning to gear up, and there was a mass anti-war demonstration called Against the Invasion of Iraq, called by the Answer Coalition and many anti-war organizations who came together to oppose the invasion of Iraq. And the slogan for that demonstration was "No war in Iraq," and then the second slogan was "Free Palestine." You remember in 2002, there had just been a massacre in Jenin, the Jenin refugee camp, where Israeli forces massacred about 500 people, leveling all the homes and buildings there. And even in the anti-war movement, everyone said it's not time to talk about Palestine. They're separate issues. And you're going to scare people away from the demonstration who just want to come protest the Iraq war, who aren't for a free Palestine. We don't want to alienate those people. And it led to a struggle in the progressive movement over whether or not it was the right time to talk about Palestine. And then there were those who stayed steadfast and kept saying that we need to raise the issue everywhere we're talking about the Middle East because they're connected. That the reason that the U.S. empire wants war in Iraq is the same reason the U.S. empire is supporting Israeli aggression against Lebanon, against Palestine, against every other country in the region that they see as nationalist or anti-imperialist ideologies. And so we went from that moment, where it was op-eds in the New York Times about the anti-Semitism of the anti-war movement, all the same tropes they use, to trying to slander anyone who tried to mix the slogans of being against the Iraq war and being for Palestine. And over 15 years, over 10 years of so much dedication to that, we have the movement that we have today. We saw at the Democratic National Convention, seeing Palestine in signs all over the place. I mean, the massive, right, even today, there's a massive demonstration at the AIPAC convention. In my years since, 2005, since I got interested in this issue, what I see today in the movement is unlike anything I've ever seen in my time as an activist. And that is because of people like you, who have been brave, who have been steadfast in raising the Palestinian flag, not being afraid to talk about the issue, not being afraid to mix the issue with other struggles, but pointing out that it's a connected struggle, that if you're for justice anywhere, you're for justice in Palestine. And so I want to commend everyone for bringing us to the situation that we're in today. And we're in a situation, and that's what we wanted to accomplish in our talk today. We produced a series of episodes on the Empire Files. You can watch them on the empirefiles.tv, look it up on YouTube. They really get more in depth than all the topics we're going to talk about today. But we really wanted the point of our talk today, to point out to people who are active around the issue or new to the issue, where we are in this moment right now with the liberation of Palestine and for Palestinian rights. I think there's a lot of positive things to look to, the fact that people know about Palestine, know about BDS, know about the issue more than ever before. Seeing it on the front page of the Washington Post, someone carrying the body of their child of the Gaza Beach massacre, things like that. Never before has it been so known, but I think never before has it been in such danger of collapsing. the Israeli aggression has increased like never before. And I think that once Trump got elected, it was a signal to the Israeli government, which is unanimous in what they want. I mean, they want Palestinians out of Palestine. They want to take all the land. And they saw the election of Donald Trump, the reason why Israeli society was in the streets celebrating at the election of Donald Trump, because they saw it as a signal where they can accelerate their plans for ethnic cleansing, for conquest of the land, for expansion of the settlements. And they've done that, as we'll talk about. The approval of illegal settlements has skyrocketed, aggression has skyrocketed. So we're in a really critical moment for everyone active around this issue. This is a moment to increase your activity, to increase your activism, because we're at a tipping point. And it's a tipping point that could go in either direction. There's increasing isolation of the U.S. and Israel in the world. But as I said, and as we'll detail in our talk, it's a dire situation for those in Palestine. So I just wanted to get into what we're going to do. I mean, we're going to share a variety of what we experienced. I mean, we were there for about 3 weeks in Palestine. We stayed in refugee camps. We lived in an apartment in Ramallah for much of the time. So we really had the day-to-day experience of what it's like to be Palestinian. Most of the time we were traveling with Palestinians. Sometimes we were not. But we were predominantly in the occupied areas and in Ramallah, which means you have to go through occupied areas to get there. And so, there's a lot of opinions about Palestine. People will tell you a lot of, tell you what the way it really is, tell you how complicated it is, and we're just going to tell you what we saw, what we experienced firsthand. So to get into it, we're going to be doing different videos, different clips from our episodes, things like that. But I wanted to introduce Abby, who's going to start things off.
Hey guys, thank you so much for coming out. It's really inspiring to see everyone here. Yesterday was a great event as well, so thank you for all the student organizers for putting this together. I'm just going to talk really, really quickly about how difficult it is to report on this issue as a journalist, and also just the difficulties to get into the country and report, even if you're just interested as a citizen that's sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Back in 2013, I was doing a daily show called Breaking the Set on Russia Today, and Operation Pillar Cloud was happening, one of the annual bombing campaigns of Gaza on behalf of Israel. I was reporting daily on what was going on, reporting these egregious war crimes that I was witnessing. After this had happened for about a week of reporting, Israeli forces bombed the Al-Shurouk journalist towers, about a 13-story tall journalist tower housing Al Arabiya, France 24, Russia Today. 8 journalists were wounded, and the RT journalist's leg was blown off during that bombing campaign. IDF spokesperson Avito Lebovich at the time said, of course we knew there were journalists in the building. Everywhere is a Hamas target in Gaza. So they're basically saying if you're a journalist, it doesn't matter. The building was basically spreading Hamas propaganda, therefore you can get bombed and it's okay. 2 days later, after this happened, RT got a letter from a spokesperson from the Israeli government saying RT has taken a side in the coverage. Basically just saying you guys have made your point clear. You're going to report the way you are, and so your journalists are apparently fair game. It was very, very disturbing, and that's when I realized kind of the danger of being a journalist there, that you're not off limits, which is a complete violation of the Geneva Conventions. This isn't the first time that they've targeted journalists. The AFP building was also deliberately targeted in Gaza. Again, if you're in Gaza, you're a target, period. But even just, inside Gaza, of course, it's one of the most dangerous territories for journalists other than Syria. I think that year alone, and during the next operation, 50 journalists were at least wounded, several were killed. So the DC Museum in Washington, DC has a memorial for journalists who are fallen every year. Actually, Israeli forces had retroactively lobbied to take journalists' names off that memorial who were Palestinian because they said that they were terrorists. And they complied with that request. So this aside, it's just very, very difficult to cover this issue. We went, as Mike mentioned, we were in the West Bank. We tried to get into Gaza. Unfortunately, our request was denied by Israeli forces because they said we were propagandists and not journalists. You know, this is one of the largest humanitarian crises in the world. We're talking about a caged-off prison warehouse where people don't have potable water. The calories are counted for them to come in and out. So it was a shame that we could not get into Gaza to report. But it's not just us, right? It's not just people who have been outspoken about this issue. We were simply in a plane with an American girl. American as apple pie, blonde hair, blue eyes, from Florida. Wasn't even there really to like go to the West Bank at all. She just simply had an Arab language 101 book in her bag. Well, as we know, with the criminalization and crackdown of people who are dissenters, and if they suspect you of, being an Arab sympathizer, they will simply not let you into the country anymore. And this is exactly what happened to her. She simply had the Arab 101 book in her bag. They speak Arabic there. There's multiple, religions and ethnicities. So she was actually banned from entry for life because she had an Arabic 101 language book in her bag. This is just one of the stories that happened that we were stunned by. Luckily, we got in. I don't know if we'll be able to go back. As we said, they're cracking down hardcore on BDS activists. Also, Jewish Voices for Peace activists are now, on a list where they're not allowed to get into the country. This aside, of course, there's a massive Hasbro propaganda campaign, tens of millions of dollars per year to control the narrative, to lock down the narrative, and that's why, of course, Palestinians are painted as terrorists. It's painted as this complicated fight, right? It's been going on for thousands of years, the most complicated situation in the world. And when it is covered, it's covered in a very distorted way to paint the oppressor as the oppressed. This is not a mistake. Again, this is tens of millions of dollars is going into this apparatus to control the narrative. And I saw it firsthand multiple times. The most recent that I was the direct victim of this campaign was on the Joe Rogan Experience. I went on one of the largest podcasts in the world. So of course it was a huge platform to talk about this stuff, which is not really ever talked about on platforms that big. So Israeli Hasbro campaigns definitely paid attention to that. I went on Joe Rogan and my talk became viral, specifically about my experience in the West Bank. And they attacked the hell out of him. There was a huge campaign, thousands of emails going to him, demanding that he renounce me, demanding that he'll never have me on again. There was multiple propaganda videos made about me trying to debunk really basic facts that are corroborated by Amnesty International. The West Bank's under Israeli military law, fact. But they just went through and tried to debunk very erroneous things that make no sense because, again, they have the money to do so. This specific campaign that attacked me was called Stand With Us. And they are essentially an arm of the Israeli government. They literally are paid by the Israeli government to, quote unquote, manage war rooms online, interactive war rooms where they, do everything from edit Wikipedia entries to comment on threads. And they called me, the usual trope. I'm a notorious anti-Semite because I talk about how Palestinians deserve equal rights in the region. So, I forgot to tell you the craziest part. When we were blocked from going into Gaza, they said that we were Iranian agents. And I was like, wait, so I'm a Russian agent, Venezuelan agent, and now I work for Iran, apparently. So it was interesting to hear that. I had no idea. But this is not about religion. This is about an ethno-supremacist, white supremacist state. It has absolutely nothing to do with Judaism at all. Judaism is a religion of peace. Islam is a religion of peace. Christianity is a religion of peace. So that's why it's so interesting when you see that they're actually blocking Jewish activists from coming into Israel, especially with the Jewish Voices for Peace movement. BDS, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, is the most criminalized activity in the country right now. I don't know if you guys knew about this bill. The Israel anti-boycott law that was introduced earlier this year, or earlier last year, actually, in Congress, signed by hundreds of congressmen, 45 senators. Basically, you will be fined $250,000 and you could serve up to 2 years in prison if you support the boycott of Israeli products. It's astounding that this is going on in our legislature. completely contrary to Americans' beliefs, which have been actually totally changed over the last decade. And, you know, we just went to, in the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, went to Houston, and we were shocked to learn that there are several cities in Texas that actually had a clause in their recovery contracts that you could not apply for aid unless you actually promised and pledged to not boycott Israel. So this is the conflation of this issue. It's very, very damning. It's dangerous. They're trying to legislate this to preemptively prevent us from acting on the issue because they are very, very, very threatened. So that's just a little bit of the difficulties of reporting, getting into the country, and we're just going to be sharing with you, starting from the history up until today and the situation. Mike?
Do you want to do the quotes?
Yeah. My turn next. So without getting too much into history, we can be mired down in, you know, all the different things that have happened until today. I'm just going to really quickly debunk that whole notion of, you know, Israel was created for a land without a people, for a people without a land, right? This is a complete falsehood. The original settlers and Zionist colonizers of Palestine knew very well that the land was overrun with an Arab population. And they openly boasted about how the entire foundation of Israel was based on expulsion of the native inhabitants there. So this is from its inception. I mean, obviously we're talking about creating a country on top of another country. It wasn't just a barren land like a lot of these people say. So this was a plan for colonization and expulsion that is still ongoing today. And we're going to start with Ben-Gurion himself. This is the first prime minister of Israel who wrote about the early days. He was also the mascot of the airport. He says, "We were not just working, we were conquering land. We were a company of conquistadores. We must expel the Arabs and take their places." This is also Moshe Dayan, a military commander in the 1948 war. He's reveled as a national icon. He said Jewish villages were built in the place of Arab villages. You don't even know the names of these Arab villages, and I do not blame you, because the geography books no longer exist. Not only do the books not exist, the Arab villages are not there either. There's not one single place built in this country that did not have a former Arab population. I mean, the list goes on and on of these quotes from all the earlier founders of Israel, and we're not going to go into all of them, but I will just say that after the initiation of Israel, IDF forces, along with what later became IDF forces, the Irgun and other militias at the time, carried out something they called Plan Dalet, later known as part of the Nakba, or the catastrophe, a series of massacres basically meant to expel the entire population, peaceful and not. It was basically to scare the hell out of everyone into fleeing the land. They targeted the most passive and peaceful communities. 800,000 fled during this time, and 500 Palestinian villages were razed to the ground completely. It's really horrifying. We have an entire history segment that you guys should check out that really goes into the horrors that took place. But this is basically the issue, right? This is what the UN came out and made a proclamation and said, these 800,000 people deserve the right to return. They should come back. And so when you hear, when you see Palestinians holding up a key, those skeleton keys, and that right to return, this is what they're talking about. This is why all these settlements on what should be the future Palestinian land are illegal. They're continuing to take over the land that should be the state for Palestine, and these 800,000 people that were expelled from their land deserve the right to return, still under the UN charters. So this day they remain displaced. There's still tens of thousands in these refugee camps, which we'll get into a little bit later, and they're just still there today. So it's a tragic situation, but we're going to focus mainly on the West Bank and the settlements that are happening.
All right. So as Abby said, I mean the creation of it. I mean, Israel was born of massacres and mass expulsions. I mean, 500 villages razed to the ground in 1948. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. That's the documented villages that existed that were destroyed and then people kicked out. And to create, it's a Jewish state, not naturally, but they created a Jewish majority by expelling hundreds of thousands of people so they could have a majority. But many people have seen this map, and so I wanted to take us through this map. And the reason we started with those quotes is because there's a lot of denial of what it was really about, what really happened. But if you really go back and read the actual texts and letters and public statements and articles by the early Zionist leaders, who scattered out the location, who started beginning settlements there, up until the creation in 1948, I mean, they're very open and clear about what they were doing. In fact, one of the first people who scattered out the location came back and said, they're looking at different locations in the world to create Israel. They said, the bride is beautiful, but she's engaged to another man, meaning that the land was beautiful, but there was already people living there. And so many people know this four-step map, the first all the way on the left. The gray area shows right before the partition in 1948, areas that were occupied by Jewish settlements. I mean, and there's a lot behind that, but we're not going to, I think we should speed through that part of history. And then we have the partition in 1948. Does anyone know how many Palestinians were invited to the UN meeting to decide where to partition the country? Oh yeah, there's zero Palestinians there. But these big colonial imperial powers, of course, had the wisdom to decide where these lines should be drawn. And so the second map you see is the partition of the country. The gray areas is this new state of Israel, and the green areas is the state of Palestine. Of course, it is in three sections divided by the state of Israel, so already from the beginning you have areas where people cannot go without crossing through a different territory. The third map you see was land that was seized by invasion in the 1967 war. And then the fourth map you see is what it looks like today. And in fact, the green areas for Palestine are in fact smaller than they are in this map today. And even though it's still technically, this third map, is the Palestinian area, it looks like it does today in the fourth map, because even within this area in number 3, which is supposed to be this two-state solution, right? I mean, this is the one state, green for Palestine, gray for Israel. This is the two-state solution. Within Palestine, within the West Bank, there are so many Israeli settlements. I mean, so many that areas that don't have Israeli settlements is reduced to these small green areas, and as I said, even smaller than before. But I wanted to start out by explaining what it's like in the area of the West Bank. Because these are the first settlements. And I do want to say about the occupied areas in the West Bank. So as Azim said, I'm a former organizer of Iraq War veterans. So I was in the Iraq War. I was in the U.S. Army. I deployed in 2003. I was part of the invasion. And I occupied the country for a year. And so as someone who was an occupying soldier, and someone who turned against the war, because of the sheer brutality of the occupation. I mean, it's very obvious to anyone, racism, dehumanization, and brutality against innocent people, against civilians. And so it didn't take me long, being in Iraq, that I realized that that's what we were doing, that it was wrong, that I felt morally conflicted, and that I felt that it was inhumane. And someone who's followed the issue of Palestine for a long time, I wasn't really prepared for what I found in the West Bank. And what I found in the West Bank was military occupation that was beyond what I experienced being in Iraq as a soldier. I mean, I think people know that there's an occupation in the West Bank, but I think that in their minds it's just, there's checkpoints that you have to go through to get to work. If you're going to pass from an Israeli area to a Palestinian area, you have these checkpoints. That's not the case. In the occupied areas in the West Bank, and I'm going to show you the different breakdown of the West Bank first. All right, so there's the West Bank, this part of the map as I showed you. And the West Bank itself is broken up into 3 different areas, right? Area A, Area B, and Area C. Blue area is Area C. So, Area C, the area that's in blue, that is under Israeli authority and Israeli security, meaning the Palestinian Authority has no jurisdiction, it's run by the Israeli government, and Israel is in charge of security, meaning that it's Israeli soldiers everywhere in the blue area. Area B, the light green area, that is under Palestinian Authority, but Israeli security. So technically, it's under Palestinian governance, but there's no Palestinian soldiers or anyone with arms anyway. It's all Israeli soldiers. It's all under occupation. And the green area, Area A, that's under Palestinian Authority and Palestinian security, which is PA soldiers that most Palestinians see as just nothing but an extension of the Israeli army. But this is the West Bank. I mean, except for the dark green areas, that's like where Ramallah is, which is an amazing, beautiful, very cool place to be. That's the only place that you have any kind of room to breathe from the constant harassment and dehumanization. But everywhere else, if you're Palestinian, and especially in Area B, I just wanted to say that it was just extremely shocking for me. I thought I knew how bad it was, but the types of things you experience in Area B, which is where a large part of the Palestinian population is no matter what you are doing, you see Israeli towers everywhere. You see Israeli soldiers everywhere. You see Israeli armored vehicles everywhere. And all they are doing all day long is just harassing you and making your life miserable. And here's some examples just to show what that's like. And this is for security, right? I mean, this is since they invaded in 1967, they had to stay occupying for security, even though there's no Israelis in Area B except for Israeli soldiers. So I guess they're securing themselves there. But so the kind of things they do is they'll just go to a road, they'll pull out a big roadblock, it's the main road that people need to go to work, and they'll randomly decide to close that road with a roadblock and say this road's closed now. So anyone that has to go home, go to work, they have to park their car and walk miles, or they just can't go, and they have to find someone else's house to stay. It's completely arbitrary, there's absolutely no reason to do it, but there's complete, every day, every time you're driving around, there'll be a different road that was just closed off by Israeli soldiers for no reason, just to inconvenience people's lives. In fact, they do this particularly in neighborhoods. So they'll go to the road at the beginning of a neighborhood and block it off so you can't get into your house. And you have to walk like 5 miles up a mountain to get to your house and you normally could drive up. I mean, we went to a funeral for a man a farmer who had just been killed by Israeli soldiers, shot in the back by Israeli soldiers because he didn't turn around when they were calling out to him on his own farmland, an elderly man. We went to his funeral, and leaving not his funeral, but just the memorial right after he was killed, leaving his house, at the bottom of the hill, leaving his house, Israeli soldiers had set fire barricades, shooting tear gas, and were pointing their guns at everyone coming down the hill. Everyone was just going to go to this guy's memorial, the family who this guy had just been killed. I mean, this is the regular type of harassment that they carry out just to screw with people, just to make their lives difficult. Another example, I mean, my experience in Iraq was kind of helping me see things a little differently, to see like the extreme kind of craziness and disregard for human life that they deal with. I mean, in addition to the fortified checkpoints that you have to go through to go to work and school, things like that, children having to go through these big armored security checkpoints, there's things called flying checkpoints, where they just create a checkpoint wherever they feel like it. They search your car, they search you. If they find a kitchen knife in your car, you're going to get shot, you're going to go to jail, things like that. So one of the times we're driving in the middle of the night, you know how they stopped us at a flying checkpoint? We're driving through a road, pitch black, middle of nowhere. All of a sudden there's green laser pointer sights coming in our car, pointing at the chest of the driver. And that was them telling us, we're hiding in the dark, you have to stop. And of course, every time we were stopped at a checkpoint, it's just nothing but harassment, and we'll get to how many people are in jail and stuff later, but that's the daily existence in the occupied areas. And I think that people don't really recognize that that's the situation, that for all Palestinian life, there's no room to breathe, because every moment of every day imagine the stress. Just going to school. I'm sure many of you work and go to school. Imagine that's hard enough, right? Getting up in the morning, going to work, getting off work, going to class, doing your homework. But imagine every time you wanted to travel between homes, between workplaces, you have these 18-year-old white kids from Santa Barbara with a giant machine gun pointed at your car, staring down the sight, knowing that if they want to unload into your car at any time, that nothing is going to happen to them. And that happens frequently, just like it happened in the Iraq War. that it's a big weight on you. And it's, it's amazing that the Palestinian people have been able to be resilient through such a horrible and dehumanizing and racist occupation. And so I'd love to talk more about the occupation in the Q&A. We're going to definitely get to some Q&A later, but I wanted to introduce the issues of settlements. And so, as I said, even in this area, so within, Area C is all dominated by settlements. Area B and Area A also have settlements. And many of these settlements are not just illegal under international law, which they are illegal under international law. They're illegal under Israeli law also. Recently, retroactively, they've made many of the illegal settlements legal. But I just wanted to explain how the settlements work. So basically, anywhere in the West Bank, if you are an immigrant who is Jewish, you can go to the West Bank into Palestinian territory, and the way it's most commonly done is they start out with a trailer home. And they just put a trailer home on the top of a hill in a Palestinian village, right? They'll just put a trailer home on the top of where a Palestinian village is, and then once that trailer is there, even though they're illegal under Israeli law, the Israeli government will run power lines to it, they'll run water to it, they will build a road so you can access it, and then they'll deploy the Israeli military to build a base next to it to defend it, as they say, which is really just to expand it. And then once that trailer is there, or once that first housing unit is there, then it begins the process of expansion and building it into a large established settlement. And then to expand, it requires, the reason they put it on the top of a village is because they want the village, and they want all the houses that are in that village. And so once that settlement is established, they begin the process of giving eviction notices to everyone that lives in that village. And then everyone gets eviction notices, they have a certain amount of time where they're going to leave, and then until the Israeli military just shows up and bulldozes their house, and then expands the settlement. And there's a variety of tactics they use, from soldiers harassing people to make them want to leave, to the settlers themselves carrying out attacks, which we'll get into. And so I just wanted to, I'm going to hand it over to Abby in a second, but I just wanted to play some of this clip from one of our episodes. And so we're going to play a little bit from it, and then you're going to talk to, we're going to see an interview with a man who we visited, who can't leave, they have to leave someone in his house at all times. Because if they ever leave their home, if anyone is ever out of their home, the settlers will come take over their home, and their home will be lost forever. I mean, it's been in their family for generations. And so that's a common experience you hear is families have to organize themselves so someone is always home. Because if the house is vacant, your house is gone. So I just want to play some of this.
Months prior, the Israeli government had already revealed its plans to build nearly 800 illegal units across the West Bank.
That there's a lot of people who say, well, the settlers have to act this way, otherwise they'd be killed by the Palestinians. And this guy even told us, he's like, why couldn't they have just moved down here? He's like, I would have been totally fine if the settlers came and just lived in the neighborhood. He's like, why do they have to live on top of our house and start attacking our house every day? So he even was like, if you want to move here, that's cool. There's plenty of room. He's like, as you saw, it's all open land. I mean, there's no shortage of space. I mean, you drive around Palestine, and you drive around Israel, and it's just vast, open, beautiful countryside with nothing on it. But then all of a sudden, when there's a Palestinian village, that's where the settlement needs to be built on top of. So I'm going to get to give it over to Abby so she can explain kind of the different ways that settlement and settlement expansions play out.
Right, so as Mike's talking about, it's the architecture of oppression. It's the oppressive threat of having these settlements built on top of Arab villages. I mean, how sick do you have to be someone from California to move literally across the world on top of an Arab village and just be this ominous force, even if you're not harassing them, just the fact that your presence is on top of where they are is quite just revealing in itself. And like Mike was saying, I mean, the home demolitions, right? The fact that Palestinians is illegal for them to build, so they need permits to build anything. Palestinian families build on top. Every generation builds another level in the house. So if they do that illegally, the home is just demolished as well. This is not just happening in rural villages. although it is almost in every Palestinian village in the West Bank. This is happening also in urban centers. The largest and oldest Palestinian city, Hebron, is the most visible, apparent, visceral imagery of apartheid that you'll see in Palestine. In 1968, Israeli settlers went to Hebron and occupied a hotel and just never left. And so what happened there began the colonial settlement. What happened there is just 700 settlers accumulated into this area. They are protected by 1,500 Israeli soldiers. So they partitioned the largest and oldest Palestinian city, once a thriving cultural hub, absolutely beautiful shops and etc., into a ghost town today. The economy is completely eviscerated. The entire city is partitioned into divisive lines where the Palestinian shops and homes have cages on top of them. Literal cages, like animals. So you're walking through the old city, and first of all, it's tragic because you can envision how beautiful it once was, but as you're walking through, Arab shops and restaurants, you're just, cages are on top of your head with diapers, garbage. We saw human excrement, bottles of urine, alcohol, glass, garbage stacked yay high, like literally next to these people who are working and living there. This just shows you the cages right there where the settlers are living on top. Again, the architecture of oppression. You're oppressing the people below you who are subservient to you, right? So this is just, typical garbage that you'll find on these cages. It was really, really disturbing to be there. Very, very disturbing. And of course, there's looming guard posts and ominous, just towers everywhere you go. You're always being watched. The checkpoints there are really horrible too, because these kids are trying to go to school. They have to sometimes wait hours to get into these checkpoints back and forth. If you live within H2, which is the part under complete Israeli military control, ambulances won't even come to get you. So we spoke to one person whose father died because he had to drag his father's body down to the checkpoint because the ambulance wouldn't get past because the Israeli guards wouldn't let them go. So he ended up dying. And this is just a completely regular occurrence. You cannot get medical attention, etc. One of the first things that we saw when we came into Palestine, not only were miles of people walking up hills, when Mike already told us what that was, how they make people park their cars and walk up hills with these flying checkpoints, but also we saw an ambulance stopped at the Calandia checkpoint, one of the largest going into the West Bank, and the ambulance was being checked for explosives, I guess. And it was just in a line probably an hour long to wait to bring whoever was sick and dying past this checkpoint. That's a very regular occurrence as well. You hear a lot about people just dying from lack of medical attention because they can't get through. So while we were in Hebron, everyone has a horror story. Every single Palestinian has a horror story. But they're the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life. Everyone was welcoming. I remember I went into a candy shop in Hebron, and this guy was like, "Oh, are you American?" He's like, "I love Americans!" And I was like, "Why? We're paying for your subjugation." I'm sorry on behalf of my entire government. But everyone was just, they'll invite you to their home and cook you food. We were driving around, one with Palestinians, which was a horrible experience because, you're stopped and accused of being terrorists and collaborating with terrorists from the Israeli soldiers, who were like 17-year-old kids from America that go and join the army. But then also, I forgot where I was going with that, but let's get into this story. Oh yeah, everyone has a horror story, but everyone's super, super sweet. You would never know that they've experienced this horrific trauma of losing almost everyone in their families and going to prison for 10 years for having something that could be construed as a weapon in their car. So this one guy, Eid Sadir, super sweet guy, runs a little kafia shop in Hebron, super chill. We were just talking to him. He was like, I have a crazy story too. Once we heard his story, we were so stunned. We just said, please, can we film you? Because again, this is every single person that we met has a similar story to this man. Just a totally random dude, shop owner in Hebron. We're going to hear what he went through.
لاحظت حالي كانت اجتياحات منطقة عسكرية مغلقة طبعا أكل فيش كان في البيوت حياة صعبة أنا سحبت حالي رحت للمحلات عشان اشتري اكلي ويجي زي هيك شافني الجندي اللي واقف على النور مسكره، البيوت الشبابيك عندنا مسكره، فيش عندنا منفس، فحياتنا صعبه كلها.
Just one guy's story. Just one guy's story, and you know they said that smiling is their resistance, because really, what else can you do in the face of what's going on there? You know, I was most surprised to learn, you know, as Mike said, you think that you know everything about the issue until you go there and you see it with your own eyes. I was really stunned to find out that, you know, Palestinians can't even fly into Tel Aviv. They have to go to places like Jordan. Just the difficulties made for Palestinians to do anything, right? Jerusalem, for example, one of the holiest sites in Islam, which is the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You're lucky if you get a permit once in your life to go pray at the Dome of the Rock, or even enter Jerusalem whatsoever. So I mean, I cried the first time I saw the Dome of the Rock across the way, and I found out that so many people are excluded from even going there. So it's a lot to take in, and you know, just this guy's story alone was just so horrifying. But it just exemplifies everyone and what they go through on a daily basis. Mike, over to you.
Okay, so this is Hebron. I mean, this gives you an example of what settlement and settlement expansion is like in urban centers like Jerusalem. Hebron, of course, the biggest one. But of course, there's lots of rural countryside in Palestine, and settlement expansion is different there because it's the rural countryside. So we just wanted to get into one story, and I'll start playing. So many have heard of the Wacha family. And so there's, as I said, there's the methods of expelling Palestinians, right? There's the Israeli military that serves demolition orders, that carries out active harassment. I mean, the harassment I was talking about with the checkpoints, making it difficult to go to school, shooting people randomly at checkpoints. In fact, we were in line in our car at one of these checkpoints to go between Area A and Area B, and there was just this old man walking up to the checkpoint in front of our car, and the Israelis sort of just started shooting at him. I mean, with our car behind him. I mean, we thought we were going to get shot because the bullets were coming in our direction. The guy didn't do anything, and then the person we were in the car with was like, oh yeah, last month they killed a pregnant woman who was just walking up to the checkpoint. It's like, you know, if you don't do exactly what they say at all times, you're going to die. But we even were exposed to this extreme violence in the short time that we were there. But the whole reason is just to get you to leave. I mean, that's what they want to make it difficult. It's not for security. The reason they block roads, the reason they shoot people around them. I mean, it's because they want life to be miserable so that people get out and make room for the settlements. And so there's this military that does it. There's a government that officially does it, serving the demolition orders, things like that. There's the settlers that harass and make life difficult for people, as Khalid explained. Just kind of throwing rocks at your houses, breaking your windows, setting your car on fire, things like that. But then there's a higher level, which is called settler terrorism attacks. And there's and the settler movement, I mean, it's quite an extremist movement, the Israeli settler movement. And so there's a big strain in the Israeli settler movement that supports not just harassment against Palestinians, but murder of Palestinians. And this story is one that really exemplifies what happened. And in one of these cases, in this little town of Duma, a family was murdered. And the way the family was murdered is witnesses say about 18 settlers who were outside the town of Duma came into this village at night. They had scouted out the location. They were part of one of these extremist groups that actually has like a handbook for how to carry out terrorist attacks against Palestinians. And they set this house on fire that had a husband and wife, an infant baby, and Ahmed here is 7 years old. The home was set on fire by this group of about 17 Israeli settlers. When the wife, with the mother, when she ran out of the house on fire. Witnesses say that she came out of the house, she thought she was holding her baby in her arms, but it wasn't. She thought it was him, that she was on fire. She fell on the ground, and one of the settlers stood over her and poured more incendiary fluid on her as she was burning. The one survivor of that attack is this 7-year-old boy, and I just wanted to play the interview with his grandfather. In fact, we were here the 1-year anniversary of the death of his daughter. She's the one who died in this attack. Yeah, burns are covering 70% of the body. You can see he's severely burned here, the back of his head, but 70% of his body is covered. And here's his grandfather's statement.
خد سيارة وتوجهت نحو مستشفى رفيديا. أحمد وصل قبل الأم وأبوه في المستشفى. لما أنا وصلت كان وصلت الأم والأبو. أنا شفت المنظر شعور بدني لما شفت اللحم.
That part's too sad.
إذا 12 و10 دقائق في الليل رحت عندها تقريبا ساعة. بعدين رغموني على يطلعوا على الثلاجة. فرجعت لأحمد. الممرضين والممرضات اللي هناك قالوا لي أحمد بحاجتك. فعلا رجعت لأحمد وكانت الدموع بعيني.
It's beyond just this one isolated attack. I mean, settler terrorism attacks have quadrupled just in the past decade. They're part and parcel of being able to expand these territories, but it's backed by the government. I mean, 17 people were seen to have carried out this attack. We know where they're from because it's a settlement that is trying to take over the town of Duma. So obviously the culprits are from this settlement. Of the 17 people, I think no one was arrested. And it took quite a bit of pressure, months and months of pressure, public outcry from around the world to get the Israeli government to even arrest people. Of the 17 people that knew were part of it, they arrested about 5 people. And I think there's been one person that's been sentenced in this crime. This is video footage of the settler group that's the culprit. And it's difficult to make out in this video, but this is a wedding. And at this wedding, they're holding up not just rifles and Molotov cocktails like they use in the attack, but here there's a photo of the baby. And they're stabbing the photo of the baby that they murdered at this celebratory wedding. So there's a photo of the baby that they killed, the infant baby that they burned to death. But beyond this, I mean, this is a big wedding too. I mean, this is the people that have moved in next door to the people in Duma. And now the terrifying thing about this is that these same settlers will stand at the gates to their village. So when this man who lost his daughter, one of his grandchildren, his son-in-law, and now is a full-time caretaker of his grandson who's badly maimed, when he drives into his neighborhood, they stand out there holding 3 fingers up. And the reason they hold 3 fingers up is they're saying, we killed 3 of you, and we're coming back for the 4th one because he should be dead also. They write to them on Facebook, they write to them on WhatsApp, they just harass them constantly saying, we are coming back to kill that 7-year-old boy. I mean, they say it openly. And what can you do in that situation? Here he's showing us the only thing they can do. They put bars on their windows to prevent another firebomb from being thrown into their house. These people that say they're going to come back and kill this kid, I mean, it was a terrifying thing being here. I mean, it was like, so imagine being in like the Jim Crow South, being black in the Jim Crow South. And you have Klan terrorism anytime they want, with the cops, come by your house, shoot up your house, or throw a firebomb in your house. Except in Palestine, in the Jim Crow South, if you were black, you could also have a gun. And the way that they repelled a lot of that is they'd sit on their front porch with their shotguns, so when the Klan rolled by to shoot them up, they would be like, well, we're going to shoot you up too if you try to shoot at us. You can't have a gun here. In fact, if he got a gun, he would just be killed or sent to jail forever, and his grandson would be orphaned. You can't call the police because there's only Israeli police and only Israeli military. They're the ones that allowed the attack to happen and refused to arrest anyone for the attack. So it was mind-boggling. And in fact, when we were in that town, we heard gunshots, which Palestinians don't have guns. It was likely settlers just take popping shots off from their hilltop into the village. And you can't do anything to defend yourself except put some bars on your windows so it's harder for them to try to burn you alive. And so it's, I mean, what else can you say about that? And this is not just in Duma. I mean, this is what families are dealing with in every area where, settlements are encroaching on their territory.
Yeah, it was really devastating to be there. And he has to move Ahmed in different rooms every night, just fearing when they will come back. And that's the only recourse he has. I'm sure you guys have heard of Ahed Tamimi. She's a new kind of icon of resistance. She was 16 years old when she was arrested back in December. The video went viral for slapping a soldier who literally was about to raid her home and had just shot her cousin Muhammad in the face at point-blank range. He now has part of his skull removed, and he's deformed for the rest of his life, probably brain damage because of that bullet in his head. So that was in direct response to that. Mind you, this is again on occupied land in her village of Nabi Saleh. It's important to understand this is just every week. Israeli army officials will come, raid the village, spray tear gas, shoot either live rounds or what's the
Non-lethal.
Non-lethal, even though they are lethal. Less than lethal is the word. So it's kind of like a game of cat and mouse. This is, the Israeli military will go, basically do this giant incursion, and the people from the village will throw rocks at the giant tanks. And then, of course, if you throw a rock at a tank, you could also go to prison for 20 years, which I'll get into in a second. So Ahed, people have painted her as this robotic, trained woman who's like, doing these photo ops to try to, and also the Israeli government has actually accused her and her family of being crisis actors, like hired actors. Look, this is a weekly experience for them. So having 2 videos go viral over the course of your entire life of you trying to push a soldier off of your family from arresting them for the 100th time, that's not really that surprising that 2 videos have come out of this girl doing this and fighting back. She's incredible, her whole family's incredible. Her dad, Bassem, is one of the leading proponents of BDS, trying to point out to which companies are profiting from illegal settlements in the West Bank. So he's been under target. He's been prevented from traveling to the U.S. and speaking about this. Her brother has gotten arrested. Her mother was arrested after this. Her father is also under threat of arrest, and now her whole family is basically in jail as well. This is a young girl who was 15 at the time that I interviewed her. She'd already experienced so much horror and death on an unimaginable scale. 3 cousins shot and killed, an uncle shot and killed. Her other cousin, not the one that was shot in the face in December, but her other cousin was the first Palestinian killed in actually this year. So that was another cousin that was just killed a couple months ago. So we were lucky enough to go visit her home because they have weekly demonstrations in the village where they are trying to stave off the Israeli military. And there wasn't a demonstration when we went, but we were lucky enough to be able to talk to her and her family just about what they've experienced. Mind you, not only the arrests and deaths of her family, but her father also almost died from being tortured in prison. So we have their whole family story on the Empire Files, which you guys can check out. But it's really, really extreme. I mean, her family is kind of this hub of resistance that even served in jail during the British occupation, the British colonial occupation. So here's her talking to me just about her hopes and dreams. I mean, this is a 15-year-old girl who should be, playing with her friends and going to the beach, which is mere miles away. So when she says, "Why can't I go to the beach?" remember, again, you need a permit. And a lot of Palestinians are never even granted a permit to go to the beach. So this is her talking about
What do you
her
want to
dreams.
see happen? What would make you happy and bring peace to you and your family?
يعني بتتوقعي بتقدر تحرر فلسطين يعني بتوقعش انه في قضية الفلسطينيين بحكيش انه قضية فلسطينية ولا قضية عربية قضية فلسطين قضية إنسانية يعني الاشي اللي بيسعدني اشوف كل يعني الإنسانيين بالدنيا يعني بتضامنوا معنا عشان نقدر نحرر أرضنا يعني فيش إشي ثاني بالدنيا بتمناه غير إنه تتحرر فلسطين عشان إنه بس تتحرر فلسطين أنا بقدر وقتها أحقق كل شيء بتمناه لأنه مع وجود الاحتلال كل شيء ممنوع عني لا أنا ولا غيري بقدر إنه يعمل اللي إنه أنا بفكر فيه يعني مثلا بحلم إنه أعيش جنب بحر يعني بدها تدخلني على البحر أنا مرفوضة أمني يعني مع إنه صغيرة بس مرفوضة أمني بقدرش أفوت تركوني على الحاجز بطخوني فيعني قضية فلسطين إنه إشي قضية إنسانية قبل ما تكون فلسطينية عربية وبس تحرر فلسطين أنا لحالي بقدر أحقق كل شيء مش بحاجة لحدا إنه يحقق شو بتمنى غير إنه فلسطين تتحرر.
So again, just not being able to go to the beach, it's just stunning. And can you imagine being a 15-year-old child and having seen your entire family either be killed or arrested and dealing with soldiers and settlers coming and harassing you and your village every single week? it's just stunning. And now she's in prison, awaiting a trial. As we know, the harsh sentences for children, there's, I think, 700 children right now in prison in Israeli jails. And Mike's going to get into a little bit about the imprisonment and prison system from Israel.
Yeah, and I had gotten a lot of international attention, and I mean, even like Zionist celebrities like Sarah Silverman have like said "Free Ahed Tamimi," things like that, right? And so it's a case that's so egregious because it's a 16-year-old girl, who didn't do anything wrong at all, and she's facing years in prison. But despite the fact that Amnesty International, even pro-Zionist celebrities, despite the fact that there's a lot of attention around this, she's very likely going to go to jail for many years. I mean, no one is optimistic about her sentencing. She's very likely going to spend quite a bit of time in prison, and will come out when she's no longer a child, and then who knows how long it'll take for them to find another reason to arrest her. So it's not one of these situations where, here in the U.S. we can carry out an act of civil disobedience and, you're just going to get arraigned and you might have to go to court and whatever, and most of the time you're going to be fine. It's like, these are the stakes there. They're targeting her because she inspired resistance, because she puts a human face to the struggle, and the Israeli government is going to put her away for years for it. And that gets me to this, the next point about life in Palestine in the occupied areas. In Area B, Area C, in the West Bank, it is under a military dictatorship. So Israel likes to talk about being the only democracy in the Middle East, but if you are Palestinian, you live under a military dictatorship. So the court that Ahed is going to, she's not going to a court with a jury, she's going to a military tribunal. Officially, the West Bank is under military law. That means the law is the soldiers who are there, the courts are the soldiers, and the laws are determined by military orders. So every time they want to make something else illegal, a general just makes a military order, and then it is the law in the West Bank. And so because of that, not just Ahed, but there is over 700 children a year are arrested and put through this jail system. 40% of Palestinian men have served time in jail, 40%. And the courts, these military tribunals, under this military dictatorship, I mean, it's a complete sham. I think it's like a 99% conviction rate if you're arrested under military law. 99% conviction rate. So basically, if you're arrested, whatever they say you did, doesn't matter what evidence there is against you or no evidence, the courts just convict everybody that goes through. Sends away to prison. Everywhere you go in Palestine, you see photos of people. And most of them are not marked. Most of them are not people who were killed. Most of them are people who are in jail unjustly. What's the number of the torture numbers? 70% tortured. About 70%, or is it 90%? 90% of Palestinian prisoners report torture, illegal torture by Israelis. A lot of that is sexual assaults. In fact, many of the children who've been through the prison system not only have been tortured as children, but sexually assaulted as children. And so the types of things that are illegal in the West Bank, it's illegal to be in a political party, can't be in a political organization. It's illegal to have a demonstration. So if you are in a gathering of 5 or more people, that's an illegal demonstration, and you can be attacked and killed and arrested by the Israeli forces. In fact, raising a Palestinian flag is illegal in the West Bank under Israeli military law. In fact, we visited a village called Sebastia that has a constant struggle in this town over raising a flag on the hilltop above their village. And the Israelis are so mad that they will raise this flag that every time the flag goes up, the Israeli military will go and take it down. They'll arrest people for putting it up. And the day we got there, the Israeli military had gotten to the point where they stationed soldiers hiding in the bushes around the flagpole. So that in the morning, when Palestinians went to put the flag up, they just shot them for putting the flag up. I mean, they survived. Miraculously, they're in the hospital. But that's the level of, you can't even express that you're a Palestinian. I mean, it's about destroying the whole identity. It's not just about kicking them off their land. They want the Palestinian flag, Palestinian culture, Palestinian tradition to be erased. And so, when people talk about, how Palestinians should resist, the right way for them to resist, in fact, they're completely dedicated to nonviolent resistance now, the vast majority, in fact, basically the entire society. It's under these conditions, where it doesn't matter how peacefully you're doing something. Any demonstration can get you sent to jail, for a decade or more. Any kind. And so I just wanted to turn over, and we were going to get into some experience in the refugee camps. I mean, the refugee camps are a special kind of repression because you're packed into a small area. This refugee camp here is an Ida refugee camp outside, where Jesus was born. Now it's completely surrounded by the giant apartheid wall. And it's like, this guy's house here, Munter, where his house is, the Israeli soldiers just have spotlights pointed at his house. So every time it's nighttime, your house is just illuminated by these spotlights. You have to have bars and units because normally they just, at random, they'll just come into the camp and just raid the camp and just drop tear gas canisters in everyone's bedroom window and things like that. I mean, the type of harassment there is more intense because they, they're easier targets, I guess, for Israeli soldiers. Why don't you give it back over to Abby?
Yeah, I mean, they're raiding these refugee camps sometimes on a nightly basis. And Aida, we were lucky to not be there during a raid, but they'll go in and, shoot tear gas. Multiple people have died from suffocation and also, shooting rubber-coated bullets, etc., into the windows. As Mike was mentioning, just the criminalization of activism. I mean, there was one story that we talked to. We went and sat down with Adamir, which is the leading human rights organization in Palestine, telling us just crazy horror stories about why people are arrested and how long they're put in prison for some of these things. Simply sharing a photo of someone who died. Someone shared a photo of his brother who died, and he was charged with incitement on Facebook simply for sharing a photo of someone who died. So that was considered incitement. He was put in administrative detention, which is you can be up to 3 months with no charges or trial. At the end of those 3 months, they extend it for another 3 months, and it just keeps going on and on and on, and people stay languishing for years in jail because of this. In 2012, and of course, your only recourse sometimes is a hunger strike, right? If you're just like the Guantanamo prisoners, it seems like you don't have a voice, so sometimes they use their bodies to put the message out there. Well, Israeli security officials, Israel's public security minister actually said that now hunger strikes are considered a terrorist attack as well. So that's considered a suicide terrorist attack, and they will not stand for those threats either. So it just shows you just the ludicrous nature of these allegations. Like I was saying before, stone throwing is very symbolic. It's kind of that whole David versus Goliath. I mean, we're talking about kids with pebbles and rocks versus tanks. There's literally one instance, I think, of someone being killed by a stone that went into a car and hit a child. So it's just outrageous. They've upped the penalty for 20 years in prison with, quote, intent to harm. I don't know how you can decide if someone has intent to harm with a stone. Obviously, that could be very subjective. So again, maximum penalty to just put everyone in prison for decades and decades to just try to completely quash any sort of resistance. And really, how much can a stone really affect a giant armored tank anyway? So this is what you see, at Tamimi's village, a lot of the kids just throwing rocks. And that's really all they know to do. I wanted to talk a little bit about Munter. Munter is who you see on the video right now. I'm sorry, before I get into him, I just wanted to say really quickly, a girl named Aya, who was penalized for throwing a stone. This was back in 2012 at the Calandia checkpoint. She was there with a huge demonstration. It was when Israel was doing another bombing campaign of Gaza. Hundreds of civilians were killed. I think it was the year that 500 children were mowed down. She was there and she threw a stone and she got shot in the pelvis. That's not by accident. There's actually a policy of shoot to cripple, shooting in the genitalia and pelvic regions of Palestinians for intimidation. This is actually an upgrade from the shooting or the breaking the bones policy. And you can see this on video of actual breaking the bones of Palestinian children. This was a codified policy in the Israeli military during the Second Intifada, I think. So now they shoot to cripple. Aya told me that she showed me the x-rays where the bullet is still lodged in her pelvis because she wasn't able to go to the hospital and get it removed because she was so afraid that Israeli forces would track her information down and actually come and punish her after that. So she's still living with that bullet lodged in her. She said that she saw another gentleman who was simply holding a Palestinian flag get shot right in the heart and died right in front of her at that same protest. Horror stories abound with her and her family as well. This is Munter. Munter Amira, he's the sweetest, most gentle soul you'll ever meet. He literally spends his entire life showing foreigners around Aida refugee camp, where Mike said this is in Bethlehem, allegedly the birth of Jesus Christ, and he's just the most peaceful, loving guy. He preaches nonviolent activism. He just kind of leads little nonviolent activities and organizations, and he's the voice of this refugee camp, kind of the media arm to really show people, hey, what is it really like here? He showed us all around the refugee camp how, everything from rationing water in these barrels to the skunk spray that they go and spray rancid smelling water all over the refugee camps and into the water tanks to dilute them for the whole month so people don't have water. Just things like that are super dehumanizing and horrible. So I was super stunned to hear that poor Munter is even in prison now. God knows why. I mean, there's absolutely no reason. They probably manifested some retroactively, but so here's a little clip from him talking about the threats that he faces on a daily basis just for doing the work, this non-violent organizing and peace work. And sure enough, keep in mind while you're watching this that he's languishing in prison as we speak for doing this work.
We are touched by the occupation on a daily basis. It is not easy to live under occupation. You will be targeted, your family will be targeted, the children will be targeted, everything here, even our trees are targeted. If you will see here, like when they arrested a little child, I was just trying to tell them, he was 6 years old, telling them he was afraid. You can see it in his face. So very high rank officer came and he asked me, where's your house? And he pointed to my house. This is your house. We can see it from there. He asked me how many children you have. I told him that I have 5 children. So he told me, this will be the last time we will speak with you. The second time we will act. For me, maybe for the first day, the second day, the third day, I spent like 1 week just thinking, yes, I am going through this struggle. But what about my children, my wife? Because they targeted my house before and my roof was burned off. But if they will target my children, what can I do for them? So trying to treat the children, their parents, the message was clear. Or to live here as a slave and to shut your mouth and not to speak about anything, the shortage of water, killing people, confiscating your land, demolishing your houses, or to leave this area. That's it.
And sure enough, they came for him as well. And that picture of the boy behind him, Abdul Raham, was also shot and killed randomly while he was playing with his friends. We're going to try to wrap this up as quickly as we can because I know that we've gone on for quite a long time. But we have to wrap it up by talking about Israeli society as it stands today. Because all we've really done is talk about the reality in the West Bank. And of course, Israeli society likes to paint itself as a liberal, democratic, and peace-loving people, right? And they just want to live in peace and live and coexist with Palestinians and the two-state solution, etc. So we wanted to go to Jerusalem at a place called Tolerance Square, and we did a bunch of man-on-the-street interviews. Every single interview you see, I didn't leave anything out. These are all just picked at random from all different walks of life, secular, religious, native-born, foreigners, pretty much everyone, just to kind of get a variety of views of, what they thought about the situation and about living, coexisting with Palestinians. So, and I asked very vague questions like, what is it like to live here, etc. So you'll see the responses here.
And then right afterwards, we can have some Q&A and stuff like that too.
After learning a lot in Jewish history and Israel history, I've seen that people make a big deal about a lot of different areas. But if you look back, correct me if I'm wrong, if you look back at the history, the areas, these places are really rightfully ours. If there's any other country that would have conquered these places or taken over these places, nobody would make a big deal. It's just because it's Israel and there's anti-Semitism and everything.
I think that they should actually look at a history book and look at the progression of history and who occupied Israel, go further back. So if it could be that the Palestinians occupied Israel, that's true, but who occupied that before that? And if you keep going back to the times of like the Bible, you'll see that it was indeed the Jews that did occupy.
But it's really rightfully ours if you look at the history and like the wars, and we didn't even start a lot of the wars. We conquered these places rightfully, like it's ours.
I think that the Jews came here, they took this land, and this is our land now, and I don't think there should be no Arabs. Like Arabs, they want, we gave them Gaza, so they should go live there quietly. If they want, they should go back to Iraq, I don't know, to wherever they want. But this is a place that God gave it to the Jews, and we don't want the Arabs to be here.
And before they accuse anyone of occupying, they should actually look back and look at history.
So you wouldn't call any of this occupied territory?
No, I think that whatever deals were made and wars were fought, they took the land, and that's the way things work. I mean, would you call America occupied by Americans because the British used to rule?
The people who kicked the Jews out of Israel were the Arabs. 1,400 years later, we come back. Now, I'm not saying that we can blame the people living here for what happened, but you gotta accept that that's some kind of divine justice, that their great-great-great-great-grandfathers kicked my great-great-great-grandfather out of here, and then we come back, and all of a sudden they're like, well, no, we don't want, it's not fair. They took the land from us.
I'm in an organization. It's called Lahava. It's against the Jews shouldn't marry Arabs.
Did you say the organization did what again?
The organization is, the thing of it is that Jews shouldn't marry Arabs.
Shouldn't marry Arabs. Why do you feel strongly about that?
Because Jews is a special nation that God gave it to the Jews, and we don't want Jews to get mixed up together with a different nation.
I think Israelis have to take over, and they have to kick them away. It will be much better not to kill them, just to go back to Arab countries.
You can't deal with these people. There's no need to try. There's no need to talk to them.
I think also that every Arab that doing a terrorism attack, we have to kill him, and not because he's an Arab, because he's a terrorist. I think you should also kick out the family, because it all begins with chinuch. I say
education.
Whatever they teach the kids does. You know, it's families.
I think that we need to... كيف تجري لي الزميلات؟ نو تجري لي ملي ماني لو أنا لا تترجم. I don't know how to translate really well.
I think we should give them a country. If you're doing any problem, you just go in there to give them a country, and then it's going to be a war between countries, you know? If they're going to throw rockets, we're going to throw one big one and done.
I don't think there's any answer to it.
Really?
There's only one way, like, I would carpet bomb them.
You would carpet bomb them?
It's the only way you could deal with it. Like, or try to stop them a different way. It never worked.
You mean all Arabs are Gaza, or...
I believe that I hope to believe they're not, but I do think they are, because I don't trust them. You can't trust them, and that's the only way I believe that. The only way is just to stop it completely.
I think that we're miserable. The Arabs make a פיגועים, and we need to kill Arabs.
Okay.
We'll talk about this later.
All right, cool. Well,
there is also Jewish civilians that hate Arabs. Yeah, I'm not saying, but we have also people that like the Arabs and everything, like Smolanim.
I think another thing that the Jews should have rights to hate them. I think we have the right to hate them. I don't see a reason why not. I won't trust any of them.
All right, and like Abby said, I mean, this was just everyone we talked to that evening in Jerusalem. But we also had the experience of, being in Palestine with Palestinians, how we were treated by Israelis. This is how we were treated in Israel, people thinking we were friendly to Israel. But we also had the experience of being in Palestine with people not knowing who we were. So, for example, driving around with this guy, Ronnie Barkin, Israeli-born, Israeli citizen, and journalist Dan Cohen. Both of them are Jewish. And so a lot of times we were in Area B, in the occupied areas, and in Area A, Palestinian-only areas, in a car with settler license plates, because it's apartheid, so if you're Jewish, you have a special license plate. So we're in a car with settler license plates, with two Jewish guys, Abby and I being white, every single place, for living for 3 weeks in Palestine. Everywhere we went, everyone was just nice to us. And the only times people approached us and were like, you look like you're Israeli and you're here. I mean, every time you go into Area A, there's a big sign that says you will be murdered by Palestinians if you come in here. Everyone was so awesome and nice, made sure we felt welcome. But the second we got into what's called Israel, it was just like virulent racism over the top. But we did want to end, before we go into Q&A, with Ronnie, who's an Israeli citizen, who just has some closing words for us. Yeah, anti-racist Israel.
It's irrelevant. The views of Israelis about the situation are totally irrelevant to the question of how do we change the situation. Did it matter what white people think about apartheid in South Africa at the time? The question is, how do we end apartheid and how do we end Israeli crimes? Every Israeli official will claim to speak on behalf of the Jewish people and will even demand of Palestinians to recognize Israel's right to be a Jewish state and so on. I don't recognize Israel's right to be a Jewish state because it is not Jewish by religion. It is only Jewish by supremacy. Israel is Jewish just like South Africa was white, in the exact same context, with the exact same meaning. And obviously any decent person around the world should oppose that because it is inherently racist, and more than that. And it also happens to be very much against international law. So when we talk about Israel as an apartheid state, even though it's not exactly like South Africa, it neatly falls under the legal definition of the crime of apartheid, which is a very serious crime, one of the few crimes that is regarded as a crime against humanity. Which means that all parties of the world are obligated to do something against it, not to be complicit in that.
All right. So, how much time do we have?
We're running
over
time.
Yeah, sure.
But if we keep the questions short.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should do for questions is we'll take a round of questions with a show of hands, and then we'll respond to the group of questions, and then if there's time, we'll do another round. All right. So show of hands if you want to get in the first round of questions.
Oh, and one thing. So obviously this stuff is really heavy, and sometimes we need a place to decompress. So in the MU 222, which is 2 floors above us, there's a quiet space. If you need to go there, take like 5-minute break. It's open. You can take your lunch up there and eat as well. So just know that's an option. You don't have to come back to this space. And with that, we'll just try to get as many questions as possible and try to keep your questions short because we're over time. So you can raise your hand and